The day my mother almost became a stranger began with soup. I can still smell it if I close my eyes, chicken soup with too much thyme, steam fogging the windows of that little house on Maple Street. It was an ordinary Tuesday in the late autumn of 1968, the sort of evening you'd forget, if not for one thing. That was the night my mother almost stepped out of her own life and into another one. You know how family stories are. They start small, a missing spoon, a late phone call, someone staring just a little too long out a kitchen window. And then one day, you look back and realize that quiet evening was the hinge the rest of your life swung on. That's what this story is. By the time we're done, we'll walk together through the hours when my mother nearly chose a different name, a different city, a different future, and how that almost choice still echoes through my children, and maybe through you too. I'm telling you this now as an old woman, with my knees aching and my memory soft at the edges, but that night is sharp as broken glass. Our house was small, white paint always peeling, with a maple tree out front that dropped leaves like rusty coins. Inside, there was the familiar orchestra of our evenings, the rattle of pans, the hum of the refrigerator, my father folding and unfolding the town newspaper. It was the same song we played every night. Only this time, one instrument had slipped out of tune. My mother moved around the kitchen like she always did, checking the oven, wiping the table, shooing my little brother Eddie away from the cookies, but something in the way she moved was different. Slower, as if her bones were heavier that day. Or maybe it was the way she kept touching the collar of her dress, like it was too tight. Have you ever watched someone you love and felt, with no evidence at all, that they were about to do something you couldn't imagine? "Annie, set the table," she said to me, her voice light, almost cheerful. That was my job, forks on the left, knives on the right, glasses by the plates. I was 13, old enough to know when adults were lying with their voices, even when the words sounded normal. Her smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She didn't hum while she cooked that night. My mother always hummed. Eddie was 7 then, chattering about his spelling test, waving a crumpled worksheet under her nose. My baby sister Molly sat in her high chair, making little fists and banging them on the tray. My father, Frank, sat at the end of the table like always, tie loosened, hair flattened from a long day at the factory. Everything was where it always was. Only my mother felt somewhere else. She put the soup down in the center of the table, but her hands shook a little, and a thin trail of broth sloshed onto the tablecloth. She stared at that spill too long, as if it were a word she couldn't quite read. Then she wiped it with a dish towel and said, "Look at me, making a mess," but her laugh sounded like it had been borrowed from another woman. "Smells good, Lil," my father said, reaching for the ladle. He always called her Lil when he wanted to soften her mood. The name hung in the air between them like a question. We ate. Or at least, the rest of us did. My mother barely touched her bowl. She would lift her spoon, let the soup cool, then set it back down again. The clink of the spoon against the china made my teeth hurt. "Mom? Aren't you hungry?" I asked. She blinked and seemed to come back from whatever distant shore she'd been standing on. Oh. I had a late lunch," she said. That was strange. My mother never had a late lunch. Her days ran on rails, laundry at 9, vacuuming at 10, ironing in the afternoon, dinner at 6. She had built our whole world out of routines. Seeing her break one felt like watching the sun rise in the west. My father looked up at her with that wary glance husbands get when they know something is wrong but aren't sure if it's their fault. "Everything all right, Lil?" he asked. "I'm fine, Frank." The way she said "fine" made all of us sit a little straighter. You learn the weather of your house before you ever learn the weather outside. You know the sound of a gathering storm. That night, it sounded like the silence between their words. Do you remember the first time you realized your parents were more than just your parents, that they were people who could break? After dinner, the usual rituals marched on. My father went to the living room to watch the evening news. Eddie dumped his schoolbooks out on the floor, pencils rolling under the coffee table. I rinsed plates in warm soapy water while my mother scrubbed the bigger dishes. The window over the sink was black, reflecting the two of us back at ourselves, me, lanky and impatient, her, small and tense, lips pressed thin. "That shirt of yours is getting too short," she said suddenly, glancing at my sleeves. "You're growing like a weed. Mom, you just bought this." She gave a distracted nod and stared down at the soap bubbles like they could give her answers. "Time's moving faster than I thought," she murmured. It was the kind of thing people say all the time, but it landed strange, like she was standing on a train platform, watching our lives pull away without her. The phone rang then, sharp and insistent, its shrill cry cutting through the clatter of dishes. My mother froze for half a second. Then she dried her hands too quickly, almost dropping the towel, and hurried into the hallway. I had never seen her move that fast for a phone call. I turned off the faucet so I could hear. That's what we did in that house. We pretended not to listen while listening with every nerve in our bodies. "Hello?" Her voice drifted down the hall, softer than usual. There was a pause, and then a change in her tone, like someone turning down the lights. "Oh. It's you." "Who was you?" I glanced toward the living room. My father's eyes were still on the television, jaw tight. He heard it too. "Yes. Yes, I got your letter," my mother said. Another pause. "No, he doesn't know yet." My father's hand tightened on the arm of his chair. "He didn't turn, not yet." The news anchor's voice went on about something happening far away, but the real news of our lives was happening right there in the narrow hallway by the phone. "There's still time," my mother whispered into the receiver. "I haven't decided." I had never heard my mother say those words before. She always knew, always decided, always had a plan. Hearing her say she hadn't decided about something big enough to be hidden from my father made my skin crawl. What could be so enormous it had to be spoken in a whisper? Have you ever walked into a moment you knew you weren't supposed to see, but couldn't walk away from? That was me, standing there with wet hands and a dripping dish towel, listening to the soft murmur of my mother becoming someone I didn't recognize. She laughed, a sound I didn't know. Softer, younger somehow. "I don't even know if I can still do it," she said. "It's been so long." There was a long silence on the other end, and then she said, "Friday?" "That soon?" "Friday. 2 days away." Whatever this was, it had a deadline. Our lives had a deadline, and I didn't even know what for. My father turned the television off. Just clicked it off in the middle of the news, which he never did. The sudden quiet made the house feel smaller. He stood up slowly and walked into the hallway. I followed him, bare feet silent on the worn rug. He stopped when he saw her with the phone pressed to her ear, one hand gripping the edge of the little hallway table so hard her knuckles were white. She caught sight of him and her face changed. Some expression flashed across it too quickly for me to read, like clouds skimming over the moon. "I have to go," she said into the phone. "I'll call you tomorrow." She hung up, still facing the wall, shoulders stiff. Then, as if she could feel all our eyes on her, she turned. "Who was that?" my father asked. Just an old friend," she said. I had never heard my father laugh without humor before. "Old friend," he repeated, like he was trying the words on for size and finding they didn't fit. She smoothed her dress, avoiding his gaze. "We can talk later, Frank." "Not in front of the children." "Not in front of the children." The phrase that means everything important is about to be said somewhere you can't hear. She walked past us back toward the kitchen, brushing my shoulder as she went. Her hand lingered there for a second, warm and trembling. Later, I would look back on that touch and realize she was saying goodbye to the life she knew, just in case. At 13, I only knew one thing: something had shifted in our house, like a picture frame knocked just a little crooked. And once you notice a crooked picture, you can't stop seeing it. That was the beginning of the quiet unraveling. That night, I lay awake in my small room at the top of the stairs, the wallpaper pattern glowing silver in the moonlight. Voices floated up from down the hall, muffled behind the closed door of my parents' bedroom. Not angry, worse. Low, urgent, breaking off mid-sentence. Every now and then, a longer silence, thick enough to choke on. Why now? I heard my father say once, the words slipping under the door like smoke. My mother's reply was too soft for me to make out. Then, I'm not 21 anymore, Frank. I can't just start over whenever I want. Start over. Start over from what? From us? I pressed my pillow over my ears, but it didn't help. The sound I couldn't escape wasn't their voices, it was the knowledge that they were saying things I wasn't meant to hear, about futures I wasn't allowed to imagine. Children think their parents' lives began when they were born. I was about to learn how wrong that was. Somewhere around midnight, the voices stopped. I heard the soft creak of bed springs shifting. A few minutes later, the hallway bathroom light flicked on. I crept to my doorway and peeked out. My mother stood at the sink in her nightgown, brushing her teeth with slow, distracted strokes. She stared at her reflection like she was trying to see through it to the girl she used to be. She spat, rinsed, then leaned closer to the mirror and pulled the skin at the corners of her eyes back with her fingertips, smoothing away the small lines time had drawn there. For a moment, just a moment, her face matched some younger memory of herself, and I realized, my mother missed that girl. Mom? I whispered. She jumped, then relaxed when she saw me. Annie. You scared me. I couldn't sleep. She set the toothbrush down and opened her arms. Come here. I stepped into her hug, pressed my cheek against the thin cotton of her nightgown. Her heart was beating too fast. You're not sick, are you? I asked. It was the only explanation I could think of for this new shadows in the hallway version of her. She hesitated. Then she kissed the top of my head. No, baby. I'm not sick. Then what's wrong? She pulled back and held my face in her hands. Her eyes were shiny in the harsh bathroom light. Sometimes, she said slowly, grown-ups have to make big decisions. Grown-up decisions. And they're not easy to talk about. What kind of decisions? I whispered. The way she looked at me then, like she wanted to tell me everything and nothing at once, has stayed with me my whole life. The kind that can change who you are, she said. I didn't understand, not really. But I knew this, whatever decision she was talking about, I was afraid of it. Go back to bed, sweetheart, she murmured. It'll all look clearer in the morning. It didn't. But by the end of that week, one thing would be crystal clear. My mother was standing at a crossroads where one turn led back to us, and the other led to a life where we would only exist as old photographs in some bottom drawer. And the person holding the map was about to make a choice. The next day moved like a slow dream. Morning came, gray and low, a fine drizzle tapping at the windows. My mother poured cereal, packed lunches, tied shoelaces. To anyone walking in off the street, we must have looked like any other tired family midweek, shuffling around the kitchen half awake. Only we knew our house held its breath. I watched her closely. When Eddie spilled milk, she didn't scold him. When he forgot his spelling book, she just smiled and slipped it into his backpack. Her kindness felt like a bandage over something deep and bleeding. Have you ever seen someone take extra care with ordinary things, like they were saying goodbye to them? After we left for school, she was supposed to have the house to herself. But she didn't. My father called in sick that day. He never called in sick. I only know this part because of what I pieced together later, and what my mother told me years after. Back then, all I knew was that when I came home early from school, the principal sending us out at noon because of a power outage, the house felt different. I opened the front door to find the living room lamp on, even though it was the middle of the day. My parents were at the kitchen table, 2 coffee cups between them, untouched. Papers lay scattered on the table, an envelope, a typewritten letter, something that looked like a schedule. They both looked up when I walked in, and something tightened in my chest. They wore faces they usually saved for funerals. School let out early, I said, dropping my bag by the door. Power went out. Oh, my mother said. Her voice tried to sound casual and missed. Well, that's something. My father cleared his throat. Annie, why don't you go work on your homework for a while? Your mother and I are just talking. There it was again, that invisible line between us and them. I nodded, but I didn't go upstairs. I went to the little room off the hallway we called the sewing room, the one with the thin wall shared with the kitchen. I had learned by then that if I sat very still in that green vinyl chair, sound could slip under the baseboard like water finding a crack. What I heard that day was the sound of my mother cracking open a secret. Frank, she said, her voice low and tight, I didn't ask for this. I didn't go looking. I know that, he replied, though he sounded like he only half believed it. The letter just showed up. Paper rustled. I imagined his fingers smoothing out the creases in the typewritten page. It's been nearly 15 years, my mother said. I thought that part of my life was over. What part? My father's voice was flat. The part where I was more than, she broke off. More than somebody's wife and mother. There was a long silence. It roared in my ears. Read it again, my father said. My mother sighed, a sound heavy with old dust, as if she were opening a trunk she'd kept locked for years. Then she began to read, her voice taking on a faint lilt, like she was slipping back into a younger version of herself. Dear Lillian, she recited. No one called her Lillian anymore, not since her own mother died. It's been too many years since we made music together. I still remember you on that stage, your hands on the piano, the way the room went quiet when you opened your mouth to sing. My breath caught. My mother used to sing on stage. I had only ever known her as the woman who hummed while folding towels. The letter went on, talking about some old friend named George, my mother's former band leader, it turned out, how he'd landed a position with a hotel in Chicago. They needed a vocalist and pianist for the fall and winter season. He'd remembered her, tracked down her married name somehow, and was asking if she might be willing to come out for a few months. Just a few months. The word sounded small. But even I, eavesdropping with my knees pulled to my chest, knew a few months could carve a canyon through a family. You were the best I ever worked with, my mother read aloud, voice trembling. We could put you up in a room at the hotel. Good pay, good crowd. I know it's short notice, but we open next Friday. If there's any chance, please call. I've enclosed the train schedule. Train schedule. That must have been the other paper on the table. The one that had Friday circled in red. Why didn't you tell me when it came? My father asked. I didn't know how, she whispered. At first I thought it was a joke. Or a mistake. I read the letter and felt like a ghost had reached out a hand to me. And now? Now, she said, I feel like my whole life is standing in a doorway. Another rustle of paper. Lillian, my father said, using her full name the way you do when you're trying to pull someone back to earth, there are children. There is this house. There is a life here. I know that, she snapped, then softened. Do you think I don't know that? Every glass I wash, every sock I darn, I know exactly what my life is, Frank. Is that all this is to you? His chair scraped the floor as he shifted. A list of chores? That's not fair, she said. Her voice broke a little. I love you. I love them. But there was a time when I was someone. You are someone, he said quietly. She made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. I used to arrive places, Frank. Men would wait for me to start before they ordered their drinks. They'd hush each other when I stepped up to the microphone. I had a dress the color of cranberry, do you remember the one in that old picture? I'd walk out onto that stage and feel alive. Like every part of me was in the right place. And here, you don't. Silence. Then, in a whisper, sometimes I feel like I got off at the wrong stop, and I've been living on the wrong street ever since. I thought of our street, the cracked sidewalks, the neighbor's dog that barked at everything. I thought of my mother sitting at the piano on Sunday afternoons, fingers moving over the yellowed keys, playing old standards while we built puzzles on the floor. I had always thought that was just something she liked to do. I'd never realized it might be all that was left of another life. Why didn't you ever tell me you wanted to sing again? My father asked. You were working double shifts, she said. Then the babies came. Then more bills. There was always something. And after a while, it seemed selfish to ask. Selfish, he repeated, like it was a foreign word. Women who leave their families to chase old dreams. What do people call them, Frank? She asked. They don't call them brave. Another stretch of quiet. I imagined my father staring out the small kitchen window at the gray sky, seeing a world where he put his hand on her shoulder and told her to go, to fly. Or maybe he saw a world where he begged her to stay. Both would have been honest. Neither would have been simple. What do you want? He asked at last. I stopped breathing. My mother let out a long, shuddering sigh. I want, she trailed off. The silence that followed felt like the whole house leaning in. I want to see who I might have been if I hadn't put away that red dress. The words landed like a stone in water, ripples spreading outward. Even then, young as I was, I knew there are some sentences you can't take back. And us? My father asked. I don't know how to want both, she whispered. Have you ever stood in a place where every direction meant losing something you loved? That's where my mother was sitting that gray afternoon, hands wrapped around a cold coffee cup, while the little clock over the sink ticked us all toward Friday. I'm not asking to leave forever, she added quickly, as if she'd heard her own words echo and been frightened by them. Just a season. 3 months. I'd send money home. We could write every day. I'd be back before Christmas. Do you really think, my father said, each word careful and slow, that you can step into a different life for 3 months and come back the same? My mother didn't answer. But somewhere deep inside me, a little voice whispered the answer for her, no. They talked for hours that felt like years. The train schedule came out. Pros and cons were listed. Names were said that meant nothing to me then, the hotel's name, the band leader, the manager. Sums of money, more than we ever saw at once. The phrase, once-in-a-lifetime chance. By the time Eddie and Molly burst through the door from the neighbors, sent there so that the grown-ups could talk, my mother's eyes were red-rimmed, and my father's jaw looked carved from stone. The letter was folded back into its envelope. The train schedule sat face down on the table, like it was ashamed of itself. We're having meatloaf tonight, my mother announced, standing too quickly. Everybody wash up. As if meatloaf could hold back the tide. That night at dinner, she ate. She laughed at Eddie's jokes. She tickled Molly under the chin. If you had filmed only that evening, you'd think we were a happy, ordinary family. But I could see it now, the way you see a faint picture when you turn up the contrast. Her smiles had edges. After we'd cleared the table and my father had gone out to the garage, he said to fix something, but I knew he just needed to hit nails with a hammer for a while. My mother found me in the hallway. Annie, she said softly, take a walk with me. We walked down Maple Street, the air damp and cold enough to make our breath visible. She hooked her arm through mine, like we were 2 grown women instead of 1 girl and her mother. You heard some of it today, she said after a while. Not accusing, just stating a fact. Didn't you? A little, I admitted. My cheeks burned. I didn't mean to. I just wanted to know what was happening in your own house, she finished for me. That's fair. We walked past the corner store, its windows fogged, the smell of fried food hanging heavy in the air. Past Mrs. Klein's house, where her curtains fluttered like gossip. My mother stared straight ahead. Before I married your father, she said, I used to sing in a little band. Nothing glamorous, just smoky rooms and late nights and sore feet. But on those nights, standing there under the lights, I felt like every part of me was awake. You never told me, I said. She smiled sadly. Some stories are hard to tell to people who only know one version of you. What are you going to do? I asked. Her hand tightened on my arm. I don't know yet, she said. But whatever I decide, Annie, you need to remember something. What? This isn't about you. Or Eddie. Or Molly. It's about a promise I made to myself a long time ago, back before I knew your faces. I never expected it to come knocking again. We stopped under the streetlight at the end of the block. The light cast her face in a pale halo, made the tired lines softer. I don't understand, I said. Why can't you just sing here? She gave a dry little laugh. Sometimes it's not just about the singing, honey. It's about stepping into a room where everyone sees you as something other than the person who knows where the extra socks are. I thought of my own life, of how everyone at school only saw me as the quiet girl who got good grades. I wondered, for the first time, who I might be somewhere else. We started walking back home. Whatever I choose, she said quietly, I'm going to hurt someone. Maybe myself most of all. What if you go and you don't like it? I asked. Then I come home, she said. And spend the rest of my life trying to forget that I walked away. And if you don't go? She took a long breath that turned white in the cold air. Then I stay. And spend the rest of my life wondering who I might have been if I had. The choice hung between us like a curtain we were both afraid to touch. We reached the house, warm light spilling out from the front windows. My father's silhouette moved past the curtains in the living room. I could hear the television, some sitcom laughter spilling into the street. Inside was our life, our routines, our grocery lists and laundry piles and birthday cakes. Outside was the thin line between my mother and the woman she had been asked to become again. Your father and I will talk more tonight, she said, pausing at the front steps. Whatever happens, I need you to keep being 13. Don't try to fix this. It's not your job. I nodded, but we both knew I would try anyway. Children always do. That night, lying in bed, I imagined my mother in a shimmering dress, standing on stage under golden lights, strangers clapping. Then I imagined her chair at our table empty. Her mug missing from its hook. Her voice only on the radio, not in our kitchen. 2 different pictures, and I was in only one of them. Somewhere in the dark, between the sound of cars passing on the wet street and the creak of the house settling, I whispered a prayer I wasn't even sure how to finish. Please, just, don't let her disappear. I didn't know then that sometimes, even when a person stays, part of them still vanishes. The day after, Thursday, passed like a held breath. My father spoke little. My mother moved through the house like she was memorizing it, her hand brushing the banister, her fingers lingering on the backs of chairs. And then Friday came. The day my mother had to decide who she was going to be. Friday dawned cold and bright, the rain finally cleared, the sky a hard blue. The kind of day that makes everything look a little too sharp. I woke up before my alarm, heart already pounding. Downstairs, I heard the soft clatter of dishes, the murmur of the radio. The smell of pancakes wafted up, pancakes on a school day, which in our house meant something was wrong. I dragged on my clothes and went down. My mother stood at the stove in her bathrobe, flipping pancakes like it was Easter Sunday. Her hair was curled, makeup on already at 7 in the morning. She looked beautiful. Too beautiful for an ordinary Friday. Morning, sleepyhead, she sang out, voice bright. Morning, I replied cautiously. Sit, sit. Eat while they're hot. Eddie shuffled in, rubbing his eyes. Why pancakes? He yawned. Because I felt like making them, she said, kissing the top of his head. Is that allowed? He grinned and climbed into his chair. Molly babbled in her high chair, smearing syrup over everything within reach. My father came in last. He wore his good shirt, the one he usually saved for church and special occasions. His tie was knotted too tight. He stopped when he saw her. For a moment, something like shock flickered across his face, like he was seeing the girl from the photograph, the one in the cranberry dress, standing in his kitchen. You look nice, he said quietly. Thank you, she replied, not meeting his eyes. We ate, or pretended to. The pancakes might as well have been cardboard for all I tasted them. Under the table, my foot tapped a frantic rhythm. Halfway through breakfast, my mother set her fork down. "Kids," she said, voice too bright, "after school today, Mrs. Klein is going to watch you for a few hours." "Why?" Eddie asked, mouth full. "Your father and I, we have an errand to run." "What kind of errand?" I asked. "Grown-up errands," my father said. That phrase again, the door slamming in my face. "But I can help," I insisted. "I'm 13, not a baby." My mother reached across the table and took my hand. Her fingers were cool, her grip gentle but firm. "Sometimes," she said, "the best way to help is to let other people do what they need to do." Her eyes held mine, and in them I saw everything she wasn't saying. After breakfast, we scattered into the ritual of school day mornings, teeth brushed, shoes tied, books stuffed into bags. But everything felt off-kilter, like the house itself knew what was coming. As I pulled on my coat, I glanced toward the end of the hallway. That's when I saw it. A small blue suitcase, sitting upright by the bedroom door. It was old, the one we used for weekend trips to Grandma's. The leather handle was worn smooth. It was never kept out like that. My mother must have put it there that morning. "Mom?" I called. She appeared in the hallway, smoothing her skirt. Her eyes followed mine to the suitcase. For a heartbeat, no one moved. "It's just, for later," she said softly. "Don't worry about it." But how could I not? A suitcase by the door is never just for later. It's a sentence waiting for its verb. On the walk to school, my mind spun. Was she going to the station straight from our house? What about her clothes? Her things? Could a person pack up a whole self in one small blue suitcase? At school, the words on the blackboard blurred. The tick of the clock sounded like footsteps on a train platform. When the bell rang for lunch, I made a decision. I wasn't going back after. I feigned a stomachache in the nurse's office, hand pressed dramatically to my abdomen, face pale from genuine anxiety. She called my mother. My mother must have hesitated. I imagine her looking at the clock, at the letter folded in her purse, at the blue suitcase waiting in the hallway. But in the end, she said she'd come get me. When she arrived, she looked like a woman trying to live 2 hours at once. Her lipstick was perfect, her dress pressed, but her eyes were tired. "Stomach bug?" she asked the nurse, signing the release form. "Seems like it," the nurse said. We both knew that wasn't the sickness making me clutch my middle. In the car, I slumped against the seat, staring out the window. The world rolled by in pale colors, bare trees, gray sidewalks, the blinking red light of the pharmacy sign. "How bad is it?" my mother asked quietly. "It'll pass," I said. I wasn't lying. I just meant a different kind of pain. At home, she tucked me onto the couch with a blanket and a glass of ginger ale. The suitcase was no longer in the hallway. "Where is it?" I blurted. "Where's what?" she said, though we both knew. "The suitcase." Her jaw tightened. "I put it away." "You don't need to worry about that." "But I do," I whispered. Are you coming back?" She froze, then sat down on the edge of the couch. Her hand smoothed the blanket over my knees. "Annie," she said, "no matter what happens today, I will always be your mother." It was an answer that wasn't an answer. Have you ever wanted to grab someone you love by the shoulders and shake the truth out of them, even as you're terrified of what they might say? That's where I was, 13 and aching, staring at the woman who might disappear even if her body stayed. The afternoon crawled. My father came home early, his truck rattling into the driveway hours before his usual time. He stepped into the living room, paused when he saw me on the couch. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly masked. "Stomach bug," my mother said again, from the kitchen doorway. He nodded slowly. "You up for spending a little time at Mrs. Klein's later?" he asked me. "No," I said firmly. "I want to stay here." My mother and father exchanged a long glance. There was an entire conversation in that look, about protection, about honesty, about how much a child could bear. In the end, my father sighed. "Let her stay," my mother murmured. "Maybe she needs to know." He ran a hand through his hair. "All right," he said at last. "All right." They went upstairs together. I heard the closet door open, the soft thump of something, likely that blue suitcase, being set on the bed. Drawers opened and closed. Hangers scraped the closet bar. I stared at the ceiling, following the sounds like a map. Each creak felt like a step away from us. When they came back down, my mother wore her good coat, the dark green one with the fur collar. A small gold brooch, a music note I had never seen before, pinned it closed. In her hand, the blue suitcase. The sight of it nearly took my breath. "Where are you going?" I managed. "To the station," she said. Her voice was steady now, determined. "Just to see." "To see what?" "Something I left behind," she said. My father took the suitcase from her, his big hand swallowing the handle. "I'll drive," he said. She nodded, then turned back to me. "We won't be gone long," she promised. "How long is not long?" I asked. She hesitated. "We'll be home before dark," she said. It was the only promise she could make. She came closer, brushing a strand of hair from my face. "I need you to be brave, Annie," she whispered. "I don't know how," I whispered back. She smiled, but her eyes were wet. "You already are." Then she was at the door. For a second, she stood there, one hand on the knob, the other on the frame, as if she needed to feel the house one last time. Then the door opened, cold air rushed in, and she stepped out. Through the front window, I watched my parents walk to the truck, the blue suitcase between them like a fragile truce. My father loaded it gently into the back. My mother climbed into the passenger seat. The engine started. The truck pulled away. And just like that, my mother began to drive toward the life she might have had. The minutes after they left were some of the longest of my life. The house felt too quiet, like it was listening with me. Every tick of the clock on the mantel sounded like a countdown. I tried to read. The words swam. I tried to watch television, but the canned laughter felt cruel. Eventually, I wandered into the kitchen, drawn to the hollow spaces where my mother's presence usually lived. Her apron still hung on its hook. A dish towel lay folded on the counter. The sink was empty, shining. On the little notepad by the phone, she had written a grocery list in her looping hand: milk, bread, eggs, sugar. As if next week were guaranteed. Beside the list lay the open envelope from Chicago, the letter folded neatly inside. The train schedule was gone. I imagined it now in my mother's purse, creased from being opened and closed too many times. I shouldn't have, but I picked up the letter. My hands shook. I read the words she had read to my father, more slowly now, letting them sink into me. "You were the best I ever worked with. I still hear your voice. We open next Friday. If there's any chance you can come, call me. We'll take care of everything." The promise was so warm, so simple. We'll take care of everything. But everything to them meant something different than it did to us. To them, everything was hotel rooms and paychecks and applause. To us, everything was pancakes, spelling tests, and worn blue suitcases by bedroom doors. I put the letter back exactly as I'd found it. Then I did something I still don't entirely understand. I went to the piano. It sat in the corner of the living room, its wood scratched and dull, a couple of keys sticking. My mother played it on Sundays, fingers deft and sure, eyes distant. I had poked at it now and then, but never seriously. Now I lifted the fallboard and pressed one key, then another. A simple melody, the one she always played when she thought no one was listening, slow and bittersweet, like goodbye. My fingers stumbled, trying to remember the order of notes by memory alone. I played it again and again until the pattern settled into my hands. Why was I doing it? Maybe, in my 13-year-old mind, I thought that if I could carry even a little piece of her music, she wouldn't need to go find it somewhere else. Maybe I was learning the song she might have sung in Chicago, so that if she came back, we could play it together. Outside, the afternoon light shifted from bright to dim. Shadows lengthened across the living room rug. The clock chimed 4, then 4:30. They were supposed to be home by dark. At 5, my stomach knotted. At 5:15, I turned on the porch light, as if its small glow could guide them home like a lighthouse. At 5:30, the phone rang. I jumped. Hello? My voice shook. Annie? It's Mrs. Klein. My heart dropped. I just wanted to ask how you were feeling, she said. Your mother mentioned you weren't well. I'm okay, I said. And she wanted me to tell you, they might be a little late. The traffic was awful when they left, and you know how your father hates driving downtown. Downtown. The train station was downtown. Did she say how late? I asked. Not too long, dear. She just didn't want you to worry. Too late. Not too long. Grown-up words for, we don't know yet. I hung up and pressed my forehead against the cool wall by the phone. Hours can stretch, you know. They become thin and brittle, like glass about to crack. I set the table for dinner because I didn't know what else to do. Plates, forks, glasses, the motions familiar. Then I sat at the table and stared at the empty chairs. In my mind, I saw my mother on a train, looking out a window at the darkening fields, our town shrinking behind her. I saw her standing on a platform, ticket in hand, the blue suitcase by her feet, the announcer calling out destinations in a voice that didn't know our names. I saw a version of our future where this table always had an empty chair. And then, at 6:02, I heard it. The rattle of our old truck turning into the driveway. I flew to the window. Headlights swept across the porch. The engine cut off. The driver's side door opened. My father stepped out first, his face unreadable in the half-light. He walked around to the passenger side. My mother got out slowly. No suitcase in her hand. The back of the truck, I realized, was empty. They stood there for a moment, just the two of them, silhouettes against the fading sky. My father reached into his pocket, pulled something out, and handed it to her. She looked down at it for a long time. Then, in one sharp, sudden movement, she tore it in half. Then in half again. Tiny white pieces fluttered to the ground like confetti. The ticket. She had bought the ticket. And now she was ripping it to shreds in our driveway. My father bent to pick up a few pieces, then stopped, letting the rest scatter. He put his hand on the small of her back, gently guiding her toward the house. I stepped away from the window and sat back down at the table, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. The front door opened. My mother came in first. Her cheeks were flushed, her eyes bright, not with excitement, but with something rawer, like skin newly exposed to air. "You're back," I whispered, as if saying it too loudly might break the spell. "I'm back," she said. My father followed, setting his keys in the bowl on the hall table with unnecessary care. They looked at each other, then at me. "Is everything okay?" I asked. My mother let out a breath that sounded like it had been held for years. "No," she said. Then, after a moment, "But it will be." We ate dinner together that night, leftover meatloaf and mashed potatoes my mother reheated while my father washed his hands at the sink, scrubbing them like he was trying to erase the feel of that train station from his skin. The conversation was oddly normal. Eddie talked about his spelling test, Molly banged her spoon, my father asked about school. But under the table, my mother's foot tapped an uneven rhythm. And every now and then, I saw her hand drift to the space over her heart, where the ticket had been. It took years for me to learn what happened in the hours between our front door closing and the sound of the truck in the driveway. When I was 22, home from college for a visit, my mother and I sat in that same kitchen, older now, brighter, with new curtains and a different table. She watched me wash dishes, her eyes distant. "Did you ever wonder," I asked quietly, "what would have happened if you'd gotten on that train?" Her hand, lifting a mug to the cabinet, paused midair. "Every day for a while," she said. "Less often now. But yes." That was when she told me. The station had been crowded that afternoon, she said. People with luggage and briefcases, children clutching stuffed animals, old women in hats. The smell of diesel and hot pretzels and too many lives moving too fast. She and my father had stood at the edge of the platform, the blue suitcase between them. The loudspeaker crackled announcements, departure times, delays, destinations. Chicago, 32 minutes to boarding. I thought, she told me, that my heart would climb right out of my chest and onto that train without me. They hadn't spoken much on the drive there. The road stretched out in a long, gray ribbon. My father's hands gripped the wheel. At one point, he asked, "If I told you not to go, would you listen?" She had stared out the window, watching the bare trees blur by. "If you told me not to go," she said, "I'd resent you every time I walked past the piano." "And if I tell you to go?" he asked. She swallowed hard. "Then every time I stand under those lights, I'll hear your voice in the back of my mind, wondering why you weren't enough." "And the kids?" he asked. She closed her eyes. "Whatever I do, I'm going to hurt them." On the platform, the cold wind tugged at her coat. My father set down the suitcase and straightened the shoulders of her coat, his fingers clumsy. "You know," he said, his voice rough, "when I asked you to marry me, I didn't think I was ending something. I thought we were beginning." "We did begin," she said, her eyes bright. "We began this. But I didn't know I was asking you to put parts of yourself away in a box," he continued. "I thought you'd sing in church, teach the kids. I didn't think. You didn't think someone would come knocking from before," she finished. "No," he said simply. The train pulled in, brakes squealing. People began to stir, gathering their bags, kissing cheeks. The conductor called, "Boarding for Chicago." My mother reached into her purse and pulled out the ticket. She turned it over in her hands, the paper already soft from being touched. "Lillian," my father said, his voice low and urgent, "I need to ask you something. Not as your husband. Just as the man who loves you." "What?" she whispered. "Who do you want to be when you're 70? She stared at him, startled. "What?" "Close your eyes," he said. "Picture yourself at 70. Your hands, your face, the place you wake up. Are there children's drawings on the fridge? Are there grandkids playing on the floor? Or is there a stage? A room full of strangers clapping?" She hesitated. "Maybe both," she said weakly. "Maybe," he allowed. "But if you can't have both, which regret will you be able to live with?" Behind them, the line began to move. People stepped onto the train, one by one, crossing a threshold. My mother closed her eyes. She pictured, she told me, a hotel room with a nice view, an iron bed, her suitcase in the corner. Herself, older, alone, humming in the numb quiet after the last show. Then she pictured our kitchen, cluttered and loud, a little girl with ink on her fingers at the table, a boy making airplane noises with his fork, a baby on her hip. She opened her eyes. Tears blurred the train, the people, the platform. "I don't know," she whispered. My father reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out, the little gold music note brooch she wore that day. "I bought this for you," he said, "because I hoped you'd keep singing, even if it was just in our living room. I don't want you to become someone else. Not really. I just want you to be all the parts of yourself in one life, not scattered across different cities." "That's not how the world works," she said bitterly. "It's how ours can," he replied. "Boarding now." "Last call for Chicago," the conductor called. The crowd thinned as more people stepped onto the train. The suitcase at my mother's feet felt heavier than her own body. I can't decide like this, she said, panic rising. With a whistle about to blow and strangers bumping my shoulder. You've been deciding for days, my father said gently. Maybe longer. Maybe since the day you put away that red dress. She looked down at the ticket. At her hands, bare of gloves, shaking slightly. At the suitcase, holding 3 dresses, a pair of heels, a photograph of us. Then she looked back at my father. At the lines on his face, deeper than they had been on their wedding day. At the way his eyes shone, not with anger, but with something softer and scarier, fear of losing her. Frank, she said. If I stay, you can't ever use this against me. He blinked. What? You can't bring it up in fights. You can't say, I gave you this life. You can't resent me for choosing us. I need to know that if I stay, it's not because you trapped me here. It's because I chose you. Do you understand? My father swallowed. I understand, he said. And if you go, I need to know that if you come back, it's not because they stopped clapping. It's because you chose us again. They stood there, suspended between 2 futures. Then, with hands that felt both heavier and lighter than they'd ever been, my mother lifted the ticket. For a second, she admitted later, I almost stepped forward. I imagined the warm air of the train car, the smell of coffee, the thrill. I imagined writing to you kids every day, sending postcards, telling myself I'd be home by Christmas. But in that same second, she pictured something else, me at the table, staring at an empty chair. Eddie asking why the pancakes tasted different now. Molly forgetting the sound of her voice singing lullabies. She took a breath that seemed to come from the bottom of her soul. Then she tore the ticket in half. And in half again. People stared. The conductor shook his head. The suitcase sat motionless. The train pulled away without her. She told me later that the whoosh of it leaving sounded like a door slamming shut on a corridor lined with mirrors, each one reflecting a version of the woman she might have become. When the platform was empty again, my father bent to pick up a few pieces of paper, then stopped. Leave them, he said quietly. You don't have to clean this up too. They carried the suitcase back to the truck. It was heavier on the way home, full not just of clothes but of all the lives she'd chosen not to live. As they drove, my father reached over and took her hand. We'll find ways, he said. For you to sing. For you to feel like, you. You can't promise that, she murmured. I can promise I'll try, he replied. When she finished telling me this, years later, we sat in silence for a while. The dishwasher hummed softly. Outside, the maple tree we'd planted when I was a baby rustled in the wind. Do you regret it? I asked finally. Not getting on the train? My mother sighed. Regret is a funny thing, she said. It's not a simple yes or no. Some nights, when the house was finally quiet and your father snored beside me, I'd lie there and picture that hotel. I'd imagine the feel of the microphone in my hand, the band behind me, the applause. And I'd ache. Other nights, when one of you had a fever and your cheek was hot against my shoulder, I'd think, if I'd gone, someone else would be holding you right now. And I'd be so grateful I stayed that I'd cry. She looked at me, eyes shining. The truth is, whatever you choose, you lose something. The question is, what can you bear to lose? I've carried that line with me like a stone in my pocket ever since. Did you ever think of trying again? Later? I asked. She smiled sadly. By the time later came, she said, my voice wasn't what it used to be. And the world had moved on. It wasn't about stages anymore. It was about singing to you kids in the kitchen, or at church on Sunday. So I did that. It wasn't the life I'd imagined at 21. But it was, a life. And it was mine. She reached out and squeezed my hand. Do you blame me? She asked suddenly. For what? For almost going. For thinking about it as long as I did. I thought of that 13-year-old girl at the window, stomach clenched, watching the truck pull away. I thought of the imaginary mother on the train, and the real one at our table. I don't blame you, I said. I just, sometimes wonder who we all would have been if you had gone. She nodded slowly. Me too, she whispered. The day my mother almost became someone else didn't just shape her life. It shaped ours. It shaped mine. As I grew older, I noticed patterns in our family like rings in a tree. My brother Eddie, who'd once gotten in trouble for daydreaming in class, grew up to be the one who always left first, college out of state, a job overseas. He kept a packed bag in his closet for years, just in case. I used to tease him about it, but inside I knew, he was living out the leaving my mother never did. My sister Molly, who was too young to remember much of that week, became the opposite. She built her life 5 blocks from where we'd grown up, married a boy from high school, took over the corner store when old Mr. Klein retired. Why would I go anywhere else, she'd say with a shrug. Everything I need is right here. Yet sometimes, when the store was quiet and the bell over the door didn't ring for an hour, I'd catch her staring out at the street like it was an ocean she couldn't cross. As for me, I spent years walking in the gray space between. I moved away for college, kissed boys in different cities, flirted with different careers, teacher, reporter, baker, you name it. But every time an opportunity came up that would have yanked me fully into another life, a job in another country, a relationship that would have uprooted me, I felt my mother's almost choice like a hand on my shoulder. Was I staying because I wanted to, or because I was afraid of that empty chair at some future table? Have you ever realized you're living your life in reaction to someone else's decision, instead of making your own? That was me in my 20s and 30s, terrified of both leaving and staying. One night, when I was 35 and my own daughter was 11, she found me in the kitchen, sitting at the table with a job offer letter in front of me. It was from a school 2 states away, better pay, better title, a chance to start fresh. My husband was washing dishes, the clink of plates in the sink a steady rhythm. Are we moving? My daughter asked, her eyes wide. Maybe, I said, my voice catching. Do you want to? She pressed. That was the question, wasn't it? Not what was sensible, not what would look good on a resume, but what did I want? Me, not my mother's shadow, not my father's sacrifice. I thought of my mother on that platform, ticket in hand, the whistle about to blow. I thought of the promise my father had asked her to make, that if she stayed, she wouldn't resent him, and if she left and came back, she'd do it because she chose us again. I looked at my daughter and heard myself say, I don't know yet, baby. But whatever I do, I'm going to try not to disappear in the choice. My husband dried his hands and came to sit with us. We talked. We listed pros and cons. We did all the grown-up things my parents had done at that table long ago, but this time, I noticed something. I wasn't looking for someone else to choose for me. I was trying to answer the question my father had asked my mother, who do you want to be when you're 70? I pictured 2 futures. In one, I had taken the job. New town, new school, new friends. There was excitement there, challenge, the thrill of being new. In the other, I had stayed. Same house, same street, the comfort of familiarity, the slow deepening of roots. And in both pictures, my children grew up, left, lived their own lives. In both pictures, there were hard days and good days. In both pictures, there were parts of me that shone and parts of me that went quiet. There was no perfect choice. There never is. In the end, I didn't take the job. Not because I was afraid, but because, when I really listened, I realized I didn't want to trade the web of people and places we'd built for the unknown, not then. Instead, I found ways to stretch inside the life I had. Night classes. Writing. Telling stories like this one. One evening, a few years after that, I sat with my mother on her porch. She was in her 70s by then, her hair white and soft, hands knotted with age. The sun was setting, painting the street in gold. Do you think you became who you wanted to be? I asked her. She laughed, a dry sound. Oh honey, she said, no one becomes exactly who they wanted to be. Life keeps rewriting the script. But are you, at peace? I pressed. She was quiet for a long time, watching a child ride by on a bicycle. Most days, she said finally. Not every day. Some songs still catch my breath in my throat. Some nights I still dream of stages. But when I look at you kids, at your father asleep in his chair with his mouth open, she smiled, I think, well, there are worse fates than this. She turned to me. Do you know what I really regret? I shook my head. I regret not telling you sooner, she said. Not telling all of you that I was more than the woman who made your lunches. Not sharing the girl I used to be. Maybe if I'd done that, it wouldn't have felt like such a drastic thing when that letter came. She reached out and patted my knee. Don't hide your old selves from your kids, she said. Let them see who you were before. Then, if life ever gives you a door like the one it gave me, you won't be so tempted to walk through it alone. She died 5 years later, quietly, in her sleep, my father's hand in hers. At her funeral, we played a recording we'd made one Christmas Eve, a scratchy tape of her singing at the piano, voice cracked around the edges, but still strong enough to fill the room. As her voice drifted through the small chapel, I watched people's faces. Some smiled, surprised, they'd never heard her sing like that. Others cried quietly. My father stared straight ahead, his jaw tight, eyes shiny. Afterward, we went back to the house on Maple Street, updated now, but still hers in all the ways that mattered. In her closet, tucked into a shoebox on the top shelf, we found it, the little gold music note brooch, wrapped in tissue paper, and underneath it, the torn pieces of a train ticket, kept all those years like a relic. I held the scraps in my hand, the paper brittle, the ink faded. It felt like holding fossilized regret. Or maybe fossilized courage. Why would she keep this? Molly asked, peering over my shoulder. Maybe to remind herself she had a choice, Eddie said softly. And that she made it. I thought of all the dinners we'd eaten, all the birthdays we'd celebrated, all the arguments and reconciliations that filled the years after that Friday. None of them would have happened the way they did if she'd stepped onto that train. Our family line might have forked into some other branch, in some other town, with some other children telling a very different story. Or no story at all. I slipped the ticket pieces back into the box, beside the brooch. We decided to keep them, not as a symbol of what she didn't do, but of the moment she realized she couldn't be two people at once. Because that's what that day was, when you strip away the train schedules and the smoky clubs and the blue suitcase. It was the day my mother looked at the two versions of herself the world was offering and said, I will not split in half. She chose us. But she also chose herself, in a quieter way, by insisting, with my father there on that platform, that staying would be her decision, not his command. In the years that followed, he tried, in his own faltering way, to keep his promise. He encouraged her to sing at church. He bought a second-hand tape recorder so she could make cassettes of herself. He sat in the front row at every little recital, clapping louder than anyone. It wasn't Chicago. It wasn't a hotel stage. But it was something. And sometimes something, chosen fully, is enough. Now, as I sit here, older than my mother was that autumn, I think about the question my father asked her, who do you want to be when you're 70? I'm here, on the other side of that question, and I can tell you this, you never stop wondering who you might have been if you'd taken the other path. But you also learn that every day you stay or leave, every day you choose one thing and let another go, you are becoming someone. And the people who love you, they live in the echo of that becoming. So if there's a letter on your table right now, literal or not, an invitation, a job offer, a romance, a chance to start over, maybe you're standing where my mother stood. Maybe you're holding a ticket only you can tear, or tender, or tuck in a shoebox. Ask yourself what my father asked her, when you imagine your future, which regret can you live with? And ask yourself what my mother finally realized, am I choosing, or just letting life shove me one way or another? Because in the end, the day my mother almost became someone else didn't vanish when she stayed. It wove itself into us, into how we love, how we hesitate, how we dare. Sometimes I wonder about the woman in Chicago. The singer who showed up that fall when my mother didn't, who stepped under those lights and sang those songs. Did she have children? Did she long, someday, for a quieter kitchen, a worn table, a life where the applause came from small hands clapping at the end of a bedtime song? We're all trading one dream for another, whether we know it or not. If my mother were here now, she'd probably wave a hand and say, "Oh, Annie, don't make such a big thing of it. I just didn't get on a train." But then, when the room was quiet and only the two of us were there, she might lean close and whisper, "That day broke me a little. And it built me again, too." The choices that almost happen can haunt you as deeply as the ones that do. I don't know what doorway you're standing in front of right now. Maybe it's big and obvious, maybe it's quiet and small. Maybe it looks like a job application, or an apology, or a packed suitcase by the door. Whatever it is, I hope you step through with your eyes open, knowing that whoever you become, some younger version of you is watching, hoping you won't disappear. And if you're someone's child, looking back at the half-explained moods and whispered phone calls of your childhood, wondering who your parents almost became, remember this: they were making choices with the tools they had, with their own ghosts whispering in their ears. Sometimes they chose well. Sometimes they chose out of fear. But in nearly every case, they were trying, in their flawed human way, to keep from breaking in two. My mother didn't become the woman in the red dress under the big city lights. She became the woman in the faded apron, singing while she washed dishes, with a little more ache in her voice than there might have been. She became the grandmother who bounced my kids on her knee, the old lady who saved scraps of a train ticket like a secret she finally made peace with. That is who she was. That is who she chose to be. And this story, this night of soup and phone calls and blue suitcases, is the dust of our old days, still settling on everything we are. If anything in my mother's almost choice feels familiar to you, if you've ever stood on your own kind of platform, heart split between two lives, would you tap that like button? It helps stories like this find their way to other hearts that might need them, and it tells me that sharing these old family crossroads matters. It keeps alive the quiet bravery of people like my mother, here on Dust of Old Days. And if you'd like to sit with more stories like this, long, slow-burning tales of love and regret and the small decisions that bend whole generations, consider subscribing to Dust of Old Days. There will always be another night, another kettle on, another story about who we almost became, and who we finally were. Because in the end, that's what we leave behind, more than houses or photographs or worn brooches. We leave behind the shape of our choices, and the lives that grew in their shadow. So hold your own ticket gently. Choose with as much courage as you can manage. And when you look back, years from now, may you be able to say, as my mother finally did, "I didn't become everything I dreamed. But I became someone I can live with." And if you listen closely, maybe you'll hear her too, the woman who almost became someone else, humming in the background of your own life, reminding you that every ordinary day might be the one when everything quietly changes. Thank you for spending this time in my family's old kitchen, among the soup bowls and train tickets and broken songs. I'll keep the porch light on for you, here, among the dust of our old days.